we going to stand around here all day, or are we going to fight?
Mr. Colin Firth, welcome to Dialogue. Well, some describe the Kingsman, the Secret Service, as, that I quote, kick-ass meets James Bond by way of Men in Black with a little dash of Star Wars. Is that a precise description?
I think that's fair, absolutely.
Okay.
What the director, Matthew Vaughn, likes to do is to use the popular culture that he fell in love with as when he was growing up, that we all fell in love with, and process them in his own way. You know, he says, you love action, I'm going to give you action, and I'm going to make it my kind of action. And in some ways, I think he's paying homage. He's quoting from other things in popular culture. But by the time he's finished with it, it's entirely his, because it's not Men in Black, it's not Bond, it's not Kick-Ass, but you can recognize elements of those things that you love. But he gives you things that you're familiar with, and then he likes to subvert them. He likes to create a surprise, maybe make them more intense or a little crazier or funnier than you would expect. So yeah, he was playing games with those things.
And people cannot help but compare the character of Harry Hart to James Bond.
Of course.
In your opinion, what are the differences between these two characters?
Well, James Bond isn't just one thing, of course. He's evolved over the years. You know, he began as a literary figure, then he became a cinematic phenomenon. And in the years since it started, which is the year I was born, I'm the same age as James Bond as a cinema figure. And we've seen him go through these different incarnations. The James Bond that we have today is not the same as the James Bond of the 1970s. It has certain things in common. But we've seen this evolution from the book, even through the old Casino Royale, which was a comedy with David Niven, who I think Ian Fleming rather liked as an idea for Bond. Very much the English gentleman. Sean Connery, who was not an English gentleman, he was a Scottish man, he was a little rougher around the edges, through Roger Moore, where it became extremely playful, didn't take itself very seriously, veered towards the camp, in a good way, which I think we've done too. Through more serious incarnations. I've loved them all, and now we have a Bond who I think is tougher, darker, perhaps a little more serious, and you know, it's got edgy, action-based Bond who has inner torments.
People who have seen the movie, the preview of the movie already, compare James Bond to Harry Hart in a way of the differences between the British culture and the American Hollywood kind of style of culture. And James Bond really represents some American dreams or American character deep inside, but Harry Hart is really a gentleman in the British style.
Well, the gentleman spy is a part of our literary and cinematic heritage. You know, it almost goes back to Sherlock Holmes in a way, or perhaps beyond that. There were Victorian figures who, either the detective or the spy, the man with all the secrets. And there's something about the stereotypical British persona which is conducive to the spy, because there's a reserve, there's an implacability, the inscrutable man or woman who's not easily shaken, you know, and can keep secrets, and there's an association with the intellect and with a brilliance at solving problems. You know, and Sherlock Holmes is impeccably dressed, but he can dispatch somebody with his cane in a very elegant way. So I think it has its roots in that sort of thing, and it goes all the way through the writings of Graham Greene, John le Carré, and Bond, and it's a very broad spectrum. But I think, yes, I think it is something which suits the archetypal character of our perception of Britishness.
And it's really interesting to see how Britons are really into the character of gentleman spy. Is there a thing or a cultural thing inside it?
Yes, it's partly fantasy. I mean, like anywhere, we have our archetypes and stereotypes and our perceptions, but if you actually go and walk the streets of an English city, you're not going to see very many people who look like James Bond or who even look like gentlemen necessarily. You know, it's we have a broad counterculture. We have punk, we have rock and roll, you know. But I think within all that, this thread persists. And I think it's partly a fantasy. I think that the John le Carré spy of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Russia, you know, the spy who came in from the cold, are more to do with the real world of spying and espionage. But I think this is more of something, a myth. And I don't mean a myth as in it's not true. I mean a myth that society expresses itself through its myths. We create mythologies as an expression of our desire to be a certain way, or a way of interpreting ourselves. I don't really know what's at the bottom of that, but I think this idea that you know, we can deal with our problems elegantly is an aspiration.
Right, and someone also described the current cultural status quo in Britain and in the UK and also in Europe as a past of the era of gentlemen, and the good old days of the European days are long gone, and with the sinking of Titanic after World War I or the World War II.
Every generation thinks that something beautiful has been lost, you know, because I think that's partly because we have a resistance to embracing the virtues of the present. You know, there are virtues of the present and the future, but they're much more difficult, I think, as we get older, to embrace those things and recognize them as virtues. So I remember my grandparents saying, "Oh, children today are not like they used, you know, they don't have respect anymore, the days of..." Now, I'm sure their grandparents were saying something similar, and there were people behaving very, very badly 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So I'm not sure it's really true that there was this ideal thing happening once, which has been lost. I think that I think it's nostalgia. You know, I think we're creating it when we look at the past. It's a fairy tale.
And you are, of course, the best choice to play such a character of gentleman. Are you really into this character? Are you deep inside, you think yourself is truly a gentleman, or there's the other side of you?
No, there's definitely another side of me. You know, I think you know, being a gentleman, it doesn't define me. It's I understand that to some extent the character has taken you know, I've grown into a public perception, but that's only because of characters I've played. And because if I go out in public and I do press and I walk red carpets and I make appearances, I'm a well brought up, polite, middle-class English person. So you know, I put my best clothes on and try to be nice. That's all. It's not about being a gentleman particularly. My father was a well-dressed, polite man, and you know, my mother was a well-dressed, polite, civilized woman. And this is just, but it's not all I'm about, and it's just, you know, it's just putting on appearances for the public consumption. That's all. It's not, doesn't go very deep, I don't think.
And what's the other side of you?
Oh, I don't know. It's even if I could deconstruct that and analyze it, I'm very unlikely to share it in an interview. But no, I'm an actor, so in common with a lot of actors, I have my insecurities, my neuroses, my impatience, I work in a creative business that can be fraught with challenges, and I don't necessarily approach every challenge like a perfect English gentleman spy, you know, because they're alarming. You know, we don't keep calm on a film set all the time. So, you know, there are many aspects to my personality which are not consistent with someone like Harry Hart.
And do the action scenes in the movie bring out the other side of you? You know, few European actors will really do action scenes in their movies. And you're
that's
among the
true.
very first.
Very few. And in fact, the stunt team that I was working with, I mean, they're led by Bradley Allen, who is Jackie Chan's trainer. He's an Australian, I think he's based in this country. He said he had never worked so extensively on action sequences with an actor outside of Asia. You know, I know there are American and English actors who would choose to do their own stunts, but these were such long, extended choreographed sequences that I was being asked to do. It is very unusual, and it's certainly unusual for me because I never expected to do anything like this. You know, my history of athleticism is minimal. I'm not really a sportsman. I've tried to keep fit over the years, but to do something as completely athletic as this was entirely new, and I didn't expect it to happen at my age. I had 10 guys training me every single day for 3 hours for 6 months. To go from doing almost nothing to doing that was like a revolution in my life. So another side of me, yes, it was another side of me, but it was a side of me I didn't even know about. What was really surprising wasn't that I ended up being able to do it sufficiently, it was that I loved it so much. Because I thought I would hate it. I thought it would be too painful, too embarrassing, that I wouldn't be able to get it right. But by the end of those 6 months, it's really all I wanted to do. In fact, I found it quite boring to go back to acting.
Really?
Yeah.
And do you work out, still work out?
Yes, I do. I mean, I don't have
so
the 10 guys.
So it changed your lifestyle?
Completely changed. I'm far more interested in being fit, partly because I just didn't realize it was possible to be as fit as I got and to be able to move like that, which it cost me a lot to get there, you know. I mean, there were activities that I had never done. And to be able to achieve them, you know, quite late in life really was such a gift. I didn't want to just throw it away, but I don't have the 10 guys, and I don't have 3 hours a day, so I try my best not to let it all just slip away. But yes, it was a complete change.
I noticed in the trailer, there's a very interesting and funny part. Is that about the dog, JB?
Oh, yes.
Is it James Bond? Is it Jason Bourne? And in the end, it's Jack Bauer. Is the director making fun of the Hollywood characters in it? Or do you want to make a difference? Do you want to stand out in between those spies?
No, he's playing with familiar imagery. Matthew Vaughn is not pretending that we are not referring to other things. The James Bond comparison is absolutely deliberate. And we talk about James Bond in the movie. He wants us in this film to revive our nostalgia for a James Bond of possibly of the 70s era. So the references are deliberate. Popular culture quotes are saying, we are filmmakers, but we're fans as well. It's connecting with the people who are watching, because Matthew Vaughn himself is part the highly sophisticated modern filmmaker and part fan. He's like a 13-year-old child, you know, watching films and saying, I want to see this, I want to see this. So he's being complicit with fans. So yeah, and yes, he's being playful with them. So making fun of things affectionately. So he's saying, you know, we're satirizing, but we're paying homage.
I believe the audience will really relate to that.
I think so, because he is the audience too.
What's your favorite literature and author?
This answer would change every time, because literature is a passion for me, and I find myself in a new passion all the time. But there's never a time when I'm not in love with a particular author. In terms of English writers, people like Graham Greene. I think my greatest passion over the years has largely been in American literature. William Faulkner. I've recently played a literary editor who was the editor of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Thomas Wolfe. And I've developed a recent passion for Fitzgerald. You know, I went through a phase where it was, you know, I don't read other languages well enough, but Russian literature. You know, I went through a period of obsession with Dostoevsky, with the French writers. It varies and rotates constantly.
It's not new for an actor to be interested and have a passion in literature, but you also have an interest in academic research. Tell us more about that.
That was a surprise to me too, a little bit like the training. I can't claim to have academic credentials. It's a little bit bogus, okay? What happened was I was guest editing a radio program for the BBC. There's a wonderful program that runs every weekday morning in the UK called the Today program, which is a 3-hour current affairs and news program. I'm devoted to it. I think it's one of the best things in British media culture, actually. And over the Christmas period, they invite certain people to come and be the editor for one episode. And you can do whatever you want. It's very exciting. You can commission journalists to go and do something in a foreign country somewhere.
Come join CCTV News. Come join CCTV News and become
it would be a pleasure.
A producer.
Yeah. So you can commission all kinds of things. You can commission poetry. You can get musicians on the show. You can invite people to be interviewed. And one of the things I wanted to investigate was a study of how politics relate to people's, to make a clinical study of politics. It wasn't necessarily a physiological study. It could have been clinical psychology of some kind.
Surreal structure.
Right wing, left wing, you know, why people have the views that they have. Because I became convinced over the years that this wasn't just about persuasion, rationale, and argument, that there was something else going on. That people develop preferences through something either innate or acquired, but it becomes almost tribal in some people. You know, I was listening to radio programs in America, actually, where very right-wing people were very embedded in right-wing views, and very liberal people seemed so embedded, and nothing could persuade them to change. And I wondered if there was something in the personality that was not just about pure intellect, or just an abstract belief system. And so I wanted to, could we do a study? And we decided to study the brain, and they found results. So King's College London launched a research. They'd scanned nearly 100 brains quite recently. And so they decided to do a survey of those people and ask them what their political persuasion was, and to see if there was anything that aligned with their brain structure. And they found results, which was astonishing, because I think we all thought this was a fishing expedition and maybe we would never come up with anything. And they started to come back saying, we're finding something here. This is extraordinary. And they found that there was there were lobes in the brain that were enlarged in people who are more conservative. In fact, it's the amygdala. I won't go into interpretations of it because it's tread on people's sensitivities. But the people who consider themselves on the more liberal or left-wing side had an enlarged anterior cingulate cortex, and that has certain permutations too. And you can make all sorts of interpretations out of this if you want. What we haven't established is whether you have this persuasion because you are born with this structure, or whether your views change the brain, because your brain will change according to your experiences. So they now have to do a longitudinal study, which means you have to study babies and then study them again 30 years' time. And so it's a long wait.
Are you still participating in that study?
No, but because I don't think the study can have advanced much yet, because this was a few years ago and they won't have updated it. But I certainly, yeah, I'd love to participate and keep in touch with it. But my name ended up on the paper. I didn't really do much work except come up with some crazy ideas at the beginning.
You were born in an academic family. Are your parents happy with what you're doing right now?
Yes.
You said in the previous interview that your parents would rather see you play in a Shakespearean movie rather than a Mamma Mia kind of thing.
No, that's not quite true of my parents now, I don't think. I had a grandfather who had those views. He had very, you know, he was, not to accuse him of snobbery, but the highbrow was very important to him. And the only time he gave me any praise was when I played Hamlet as a student. So he didn't like frivolous entertainment. I think frivolous entertainment is not frivolous. I think we need light material in our diet. It's essential, in fact. I think if we only had Shakespeare, I think we would be culturally impoverished. No, my parents are not snobs, and I think they appreciate like popular material. It's very, very important. But I think they were worried, that's all. You know, they'd never met an actor before, and they were academics, and they hoped that I would go to Cambridge and perhaps become a scholar. But I think they take what I do quite seriously, and they see that there's a lot of educational potential in what I do as well.
For years, the Chinese have been talking about the penetration of culture from Hollywood. As a very leading actor, a very successful Hollywood actor, what do you think of the cultural pervasiveness?
I don't know. I think it's probably much more nuanced and complex than that perception would suggest. I don't think Hollywood is just one thing. And I don't think, it tends to be spoken of as one thing. People seem to almost imagine that there's a cohesive, coherent thing, like an organization, a conspiracy that is Hollywood, where they all agree on certain things and they have a policy and a strategy. It's not true. It's not a place either. You know, obviously, Los Angeles is the center of that particular entertainment industry, and it gets called Hollywood. But if you go there and you interact with people, you'll find incredibly diverse agendas going on. You'll find people conflicting creatively. There's the independent alternative version of it, which is now not even particularly alternative anymore. You find extraordinary creative minds frequently who come from outside. They might be from Europe, they might be from Asia, who've constantly contributed to it. It began as a largely immigrant industry. You know, Hitchcock, Otto Preminger, you know, Fred Zinnemann, great immigrant directors who formed Hollywood. And I think it has a lot of that. There are some embedded attitudes. There are some very lazy, cynical, financially driven elements to it. And those are very powerful, there's no question. But it's not only that. And I also think it's much more of a dialogue and much less of a kind of colonization by one industry. I think that America does allow itself, that Hollywood allows itself to be very, very much influenced. Doesn't happen immediately, you know, but it is influenced by cinema from elsewhere. So I think it does go both ways.
Part of the reason why is because Hollywood movie companies are attaching great importance to the global market, yes, and very importantly, China.
Well, I'm here now for the first time. I think that, you know, there's a real recognition now of how important this country is, both as a market and just somewhere to start to create a creative exchange with. You know. Is
this your first time to China or Beijing?
It's my first time, yeah.
How do you feel about it?
Well, I've been here for 24 hours, so I'm still processing it, but I'm very excited. I travel a lot in my job, and sometimes, however interesting the place is, I'm almost not ready to get on another plane and go somewhere. But this time, I've been very, very excited.